Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Build. I'm your host, Tatiana Pyle, and today I have the pleasure of sitting down with Karine Jean-Pierre. Despite the odds Karine faced growing up as a Haitian immigrant in Queens, she broke the mold and did not let her stereotypes dictate her future. Currently, Karine is the Chief Public Affairs Officer for MoveOn, an activist, political analyst at MSNBC, a member of the School of International Public Affairs at Columbia University, where she teaches a course on campaign management, and most recently, the author of her very first book, Moving Forward, a story of hope, hard work, and the promise of America, which is officially available in bookstores today. Everyone help me in welcoming Karine Jean-Pierre. Yes,
everybody.
What a pleasure.
Today, thank you.
Today, yes. Congratulations on your very
so much,
first
Tatiana.
book.
Thank you for having me.
Of course.
Thank you, Build. I appreciate it. It's so exciting.
Yes.
Such an exciting day.
How has this experience been for you? Because you're usually the one who is giving the news, and now look at you, you're in the news.
It's so funny that you said that. I was thinking about that a couple of days ago when I was kind of going through in my mind the week of pushing this book out and of the launch, and I thought, wow, I've never been in this space where I have to talk about myself, number one, and just go really deep on like why I wrote the book, what's in the book, because it's part memoir. And so I thought about that. I thought, wow, this is going to be tough. It's going to be really tough, but here I am.
And I just want to take a step back just to talk about you as a person. You are a representative of so many communities. You're an African-American woman. You are a woman, you are a part of the LGBTQIA community, and you're an activist. Like, you truly are an icon in your own right. Like, how has this experience been for you when you are channeling that energy into the book, and then now speaking on the book tour? Like, how has that been for you?
I think I looked at it as a very important goal that I was trying to accomplish. I wanted to respect all of the parts that I am and make people pride, but also inspire people. And I thought, you know, for the immigrant community, I want to make sure that they felt, you know, pride in what I was writing and what I was saying, and also to communicate and connect in the LGBTQI community, in the Black woman space, right? I wanted to make sure that what I was writing, putting on paper, really reflected all of those parts of me. And but also inspire. And there's some tough stuff in the book, as you know, but I also wanted to leave people understanding or wanting to be motivated and moving forward in a positive light. So it was trying to walk that balance and just be respectful to the communities I represent.
Right. And for so many of these communities, they have channeled a lot of the way you've lived your life now, and a lot of the reasons why you've made decisions in your career, in your personal life. So when writing this book, how did you channel in those obstacles or challenges that you faced in order to accurately get those into words?
Yeah, so I wrote the book wanting to make sure that I was raw, authentic, and honest. And as you mentioned in my intro, I teach at Columbia University. I teach a graduate class, and it's campaign management. And a lot of people come up to me, a lot of students come up to me, and they're like, "How did you end up in the White House? What was your path? How did you do that?" And so that was part of my thinking as well, wanting to make sure that you know, I told a story. Well, let me step back for a second. I think people see me and they think, oh, she's probably had the best life. You know, she probably went to the best schools and probably had gone no problems at all in life. And so when I wrote the book, I wanted to be honest and say, no, I had up and downs. It wasn't easy. And it was really talking to those folks who've had up and downs in their life and think that there's no other way out, right? Or they think that I don't know how I'm going to lift myself up. So I wanted to show that, look, I did it with all of these obstacles, because representing those communities actually also represented obstacles, right? And so so that was what was in my mind. It was like, okay, I wanted to paint a real picture of tragedy, obstacles, but also getting to the other side of things.
Right. And I think it's really important to talk about your Haitian background, because I'm sure for most immigrants, they can relate to the experience moving here from another country and their parents being of that descent. A lot of the pressure is to be either an engineer, a doctor, or a lawyer, or some other presumably high social status type of occupation. So growing up, like, what truly inspired your passion for politics?
Nothing. I didn't have any passion for politics growing up. There were moments where you know, I talk about this in the book about the first Democratic convention that I saw, and I was really kind of surprised and was like, what's going on here? But you have to remember, both my parents are from Haiti. They grew up in a dictatorship. They weren't allowed to have a free voice or, you know, vote or anything like that in a way that they felt comfortable to express themselves politically. So for my parents, politics was not the way that they wanted their daughter or any of their kids to go because it was connected to corruption. So when I told them that I was going to go into politics, they were very, very confused because, like most immigrant families, they said, oh, you're going to be a lawyer, doctor, or engineer. And for me, it was being a doctor. That's what they wanted. In their minds, being successful in America was to be one of those three professions. So they were disappointed when I decided, oh, you know, I'm going to go into the New York City Council, which was one of my first jobs, or I'm going to go work on his campaign and live all across the country, which is a presidential campaign. And it wasn't until I worked on President Obama's 2008 campaign and 2012 campaign, but it wasn't until Barack Obama won in 2008, November 2008, and I told them, oh, I'm going to go to the White House. They were like, oh, well, that's historical. That's important. And that's when they understood what it all meant, that their daughter was going to be in the White House, really be in government and in politics in a real way.
Right, that's amazing. So I think it's really important, again, about the representation. Yeah. We have women who are running for high positions in office now, like Kamala Harris. Yeah. Then we have Stacey Abrams. Then we have Maxine Waters, who are now big faces in politics. How was the experience for you as a Black woman who is part of the LGBTQIA community? How was that for you getting into politics?
Oh, representation was major. You know, when I got into politics, the person that Maxine Waters was certainly somebody that I looked up to. Donna Brazile, who is up until this year was the only Black woman to have ever run a presidential campaign, and that was amazing to me. Barbara Jordan was somebody that I really admired, Congresswoman from Texas, who was a great orator, incredibly powerful. Actually played a big role in the Watergate hearings. And so I looked for that. I hungered for that because I wanted to see, well, who else is in this space that looks like me? Now, fast forward in 2019, we have better representation, and it's amazing to see. You know, we had a first lady who was a Black woman, right? And we've had these scenarios that makes you really proud. But we still have a long way to go. We still have a long, long way to go, and it is great to see Kamala Harris in this presidential election cycle representing all of us. So, yeah, I think representation matters. It matters in a big way, and this is why one of the reasons I wrote the book, because I wanted people to see young girls, young Black girls, to see, look, here's somebody that you can look up to. Even at last night, I had a book signing last night in Upper East Side at a Barnes & Noble, and it was amazing to see all these little girls, little Black girls, just sitting there listening to everything I was saying, and it was late.
Sure, life-changing.
It was like, yeah, it was, and it actually, in my mind, it did turn something in my mind. I was like, oh my gosh, yeah, I gotta be mindful of what I'm saying. I have a perch now. I have a platform, and these young ladies, these young girls, really are listening to my every word, and they want to be encouraged. They want to see what their life, or get a sense of what their life could be. And so for them, I'm their representation. And so that's kind of coming full circle now. And I think it's just something, hopefully a mantle that I can carry well.
Yeah, and who knows, maybe in 10 years, there will be another little girl sitting here and saying
exactly.
that you were a part of her inspiration.
There better
be. Yeah. So writing this book, you reflect a lot back on past circumstances in your life. Mm-hmm. How was that process for you, channeling those stories to make it into inspirational segments for people to read?
It was tough. Like I said earlier, I wanted to be raw, honest, and truthful, and really live in my truth. Mm-hmm. And so there were parts of the book that were very hard to write about. But I knew, like I said earlier, I think by writing it, I knew that it would help somebody else. In dedicating the book, I was trying to figure out who would I dedicate the book to. And I decided to dedicate it to anyone who has been told no. If you've been told no, I hope this book motivates you and inspires you. And that's kind of the mindset when I was writing, and even the tough, hardships, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to tell the little girl, or the little boy, or whoever reading the book, well, not little, but the person, yes. that they knew that there was a way out, and they knew that it didn't have to be this way. And so, yeah, so I really wanted to inspire.
Yeah. Do you mind sharing a particular story or hardship that you experienced that you overcame?
Yeah, one of the stories that I think it's important to talk about is mental health, and there's always stigmas around mental health, and so I talk about what I went through in college, and I attempted suicide, and that was a very dark period, dark moment in my life. And if you come from an immigrant community, if you come from a Black community, that is something that is not okay, and that that is looked down upon and is stigmatized in a big way. And so when that happened, or when I went through that process, it was tough, and it took me years to deal with it. I didn't go to therapy or really deal with it until years down the road. And I talk about that. I talk about the details, the specifics, how I got there, and how I got on the other side of it. But I think that is an issue that we really need to talk about, and because there are people going through so much, and so that is one of the obstacles that I had to get over.
Well, you are very brave, and thank you
Thank
for
you.
sharing that piece of information
Thank
with
you.
us. We appreciate
I
that.
appreciate that, Tati.
So, for a living, you encourage the youth to vote, and this past election has seen a significant increase in the youth, 16%.
16%.
Yes, it's incredible. What are some things, and I know you shared in the book as well, that you and your organization has been working on to increase the youth voting?
Well, I think we have to continue communicating and messaging to young people that in particular, if you care about climate change, if you care about gun reform, this is it. You gotta step into the political arena, and a way to have a voice is doing that. I think I like to use March for Our Lives, the young people for March for Our Lives who got involved and went across the country to really engage with their peers and let them know like their vote matters. And look what we did. Look what they did in from 2014 to 2018 in voting in a midterm. It went up 16%, like you just said, and it mattered. It really did. It made a difference in key elections and key races. And I think that is the continued message that organizations like mine need to do, and all of us, is just to let them know your vote matters. And it's not just voting, right? And that's what March for Our Lives taught us. It's not just voting, it's getting involved on the ground, getting your neighbors involved, knocking on doors, because we're not gonna win in 2020. If you're thinking about 2020 and you're worried, we're not gonna win by being on social media and just, going after each other. We're going to win if we get into the communities and knock on doors, make the phone calls, and support the candidate that we want to win.
Right, and I want to talk about a particular moment since you've mentioned getting involved. There was a particular case with Kamala Harris where you were having a discussion with her, and a protester just rushed the stage. How was that moment for you?
That moment, it's a two-part to it. So at the moment, I wasn't thinking, my safety or anything like that. It just, there was this gentleman that jumped on stage with all of his privilege, came on. Three women of color are sitting on stage, and we were talking about women's issues and women of color issues with women of color. And I'm thinking to myself, 24 hours, the Virginia Beach shooting had just happened. There's to my left is Senator Kamala Harris, who's a Black woman who is running for president. And I thought to myself, wow, we're living in this crazy, crazy space, crazy world right now. It's very divided. There's rhetoric, hateful rhetoric happening constantly. And I just thought he was coming for her. And I thought, that's just is not going to happen, and I just went into a protective mode. That's just where I was in that mind space at that time, and I went in and I blocked him. And you could look at the video; it went viral, which was wild.
It was amazing.
It was. And then afterwards, I thought, wow, that was crazy. That was insane. I could have been hurt, and I did think about that afterwards. But then something else, I think, bigger happened, which was I started hearing from women, Black women, women of color, women in general, who were saying to me, thank you for what you did, because they've been in scenarios or situations, clearly not that severe, but in spaces where they felt like their voices didn't matter, or they felt unsafe, and no one stepped in for them. And it started this bigger, larger conversation about how women are treated in spaces, right? In all male spaces. And it was a very nuanced conversation, but it was a very important conversation that needed to have, and it was triggering for women. And so that was the thing that I thought, wow, who knew that that moment would bring up so much for women? And I think it's a conversation that we need to have.
Yeah, I agree. It was truly metaphoric in the sense of
exactly right.
everything that happened. And again, as I mentioned, you were extremely brave for doing that.
Thank you.
Putting yourself last in this situation, honestly, I applaud you for that. I also want to talk a little bit about working with Obama.
Yeah.
What an amazing experience that must have been for you.
Yeah.
You've also worked in the White House and on his campaign as well. So what are some of the differences in Obama's administration and Trump's current administration that you've noticed? Outside of the very obvious ones.
You know, President Obama, and I'm biased, but he is truly a one of a kind. And the way that I describe him is he is easily the smartest person in the room all the time. And he took the job incredibly seriously. Reading, learning, wanting to be fair, wanting to make the right decisions, being methodical, thoughtful, talking to others, bringing other people into the conversation. And you just don't see that. What we have currently is someone who does policy by tweet, which is very dangerous. He tweets, and a lot of his own advisors don't even know there's new policy now. It's on Twitter. Like, they have no idea what's going on, and it's such a dangerous thing to do. And then the division of hate, the rhetoric. The anti-immigrant kind of language that we hear from him constantly, the policies, and it's not, it's the Muslim community, it's the LGBTQIA community, it's women, and I've just never seen anything like that in my lifetime. I mean, this is, comparing him to many other presidents, I just never seen something so blatant, and so just pure of kind of hate. And I think the biggest thing is just he's not a president for everybody. He's a president for a small section of his base, and it's not what we should be all about. And we have our, America has its own history, history that we can question and we should question, that is incredibly problematic. But it's not supposed to be what we're going towards, and that's the fear. I think when we elected President Obama, we thought we were moving forward in a direction that people were really hopeful about, and then we kind of just swung a totally different direction.
I think right now we're in a space where it's really hard to figure out what to follow, what to trust. And you work for a news corporation right now. Like, how has this experience with the rise in this fake news trend, how has that experience been for you working in the role that you are in at MSNBC?
Yeah, so I'm not a journalist. I'm a political pundit. I'm clearly biased in where I stand on what side of the aisle I stand with. So I worry more so for the folks who are journalists when I think about the media, because he's going directly after them. When he says the fake news, he's debasing what media is supposed to be, right? They're supposed to be like the fourth estate. They're supposed to be truth tellers. They're supposed to be going to trying to get the real story behind something. And so when he attacks them, he puts them in danger, and I worry about that. And just the misinformation, I worry about that a great deal as well, because people trust certain networks and certain publications to tell them what's going on. And if there's misinformation being spread out there, that could be dangerous on a whole different level as well. So I take, even though I'm a political analyst and I'm clearly a Democrat, I take what I say on TV very seriously. I do lead with facts and lead with truths. Because I know people are watching and they're trusting what I'm saying to them, and so it is a big responsibility, and so I take heed and care to that when I'm on the news network.
Right. And in your book, you talk a lot about working with campaigns, and we have such an important election coming up in this next year. Do you have maybe any pieces of advice for any of the candidates who are still running for president on what they could do to potentially secure that Democratic nomination?
Yeah, I think that they just have to go on the ground and make their case. You know, it's not a national election. It is a state by state by state election. Even to in many regards, so is the general election. It's like you have to go. You gotta shake those hands. You have to make sure you have a clear message. You know how you're going to change the country. So that's what I would tell them. Is just keep going out there. People want to hear when you think about these 4 early states. They're so accustomed to having presidential candidates come their way, and they take their state's job and being the first one or the second one or third one or the fourth one very, very seriously. And so they want to listen and they want to hear what you're bringing forth. I would say to whoever's the nominee, the Democratic nominee in the general election, is it's going to take a movement to win. It's going to take a movement to beat Donald Trump. It is. And it's not, you can't sit on your laurels. You know, yes, don't look at the national polls. It's going to mean making sure young people come out and vote, making sure that Obama coalition comes out and vote, making sure people who have never voted come out and vote. It is going to be a lot of work. And that's what I would say to the nominee. You will need a movement to win.
And I want to talk a little bit about voting too, especially as a person who does come from an immigrant family. Have there ever been any discussions around like fear of voting or inaccessibility to voting? Especially now, it is election day, and in, per state you can vote for general council or any state laws.
Yeah, voter suppression is huge. It's been on a kind of rampage for the past 10 years or so, and it played a big role in 2016. When you think about Wisconsin, more than 200,000 people were not able to vote. Many of them were Black people, poor people. I mean, this is the target. The target is to make sure people of color, poor people, do not vote, and that is something Democrats need to really focus on and have a plan to deal with that. Because when you think about North Carolina, you think about Florida, you think about these battleground states that matter to getting to that 270 electoral colleges. Because we can win the popular vote, but if you don't get to that 270, you're not going to win that presidency. You're not going to not be in the White House. And it also should matter just the down ballot, not just who's at the top. And so that is a real problem that has happened. And a lot of it, started, or not started, but a lot of it is connected to the gutting of the Civil Rights, the Voting Rights Act back in 2013. So there is a lot of issues, a lot of problems that we have to deal with, and voter suppression is one of them. It's incredibly real, and we saw that again, like I said, in 2016.
Right. I want to backtrack a little bit and go back to the book. There is a point in the book where you talk just about your own personal struggles. I know we mentioned this earlier. Mm-hmm. How have you been able to openly share those anecdotes, like the one you shared with us earlier, without you still feeling that maybe trauma associated or pain associated with that?
Yeah, so this is the first time in this past month that I've been sharing it. I wrote an article about mental health for NBC.com about 3 weeks ago. It was the first time I ever actually wrote about it before anybody got the book. And now it's in the book, clearly, and the book is out today. And so, I don't know, people ask about resolve, like how do you resolve the pain or the trauma that you go through? And I think sometimes you never do resolve it, and that's okay. I don't think that there's no need to resolve everything. I think it's more of like, how do you survive and keep going and try to be positive, try to move forward in a way that makes you feel good. And so I think for me, it's going to therapy. For me, it's having honest conversations with my partner and my family and sharing. And I think that's what's important. But I don't know if I will ever resolve a lot of the trauma that I've gone through, and I think that's okay.
And as a mother, yes, how have you been able to balance all of the things that you do, in addition to writing the book, in addition to being on this book tour? How has this experience been for you?
Well, as a mom, it's made it even more important. We have a 5-year-old, and she's just an amazing little person. And I think about, when she's, let's say, 12 years old, and she looks back in this time that we're in, and she thinks, well, what were you doing? What were you doing when this crazy, what were you all doing? What were you thinking? And I want her to know that her mama fought for her future and her friend's future and our kids' future. And that's why I do a lot of what I do, which is we have to leave a country that still can thrive and survive down the road, and it's up to us to do that. And so I think about her. So the book was even more important. But to your question about balance, when I'm home and I'm with her and I'm very, very involved in her life, I pick her up from school, I drop her off when I can, and we go to ballet and karate and all of those things that she has in her wonderful little life, and I try to be there as much as I can. And it's a number one thing that I find incredibly important in my family life, is to be there for my family.
I think it's really important too that you mentioned it, but having involvement in your daughter's life day to day, how do you explain what's going on right now to a young person?
Gosh. So that is, oh wow, that's a good question, because so she has like these amazing pictures with President Obama when she was a little baby, probably like, I think her first one was when she was 9 months, and then there's some others as he was going through the end of his administration. So she knew Obama, right? She understood who Obama was, not in a deep way, but understood that he was a president. And when she turned about 3 or 4, she started talking about Donald Trump. And it was really bizarre because we didn't talk to her about it. And clearly she and her friends are talking about Donald Trump, because I think their parents are talking about Donald Trump. And there was one funny thing that happened, is she looked up at the TV and she saw Donald Trump, and she goes to me, "Mama, there goes President Obama Trump." And I said, "Oh no!"
If only he had the same qualities, right?
But it's interesting to see how young people think. So she kind of merged the two, understanding that they were both presidents, and thought it was a very interesting time. And she brings him up. She brings him up from time to time. I mean, she's 5. She brings up how he's not a nice person. He says bad things. At 5, did not get that from us. And so we have to remember our children are watching and they're listening. And that is something that is really important. That is actually one of the things that scares me the most about the moment that we're in. When I hear that and we have to jump in and either change the conversation or try to figure out where she got that from, and she's adamant about it. And so that's troubling.
And you also talk a little bit about flawed candidates and your involvement with that. Can you explain a little bit about what exactly that is and how you are involved with that?
Yeah, so I talk in my book. My book is also a blueprint for folks who are interested in politics, and I talk about, like, my path wasn't a normal path. I thought I was going to be a doctor. I didn't. I got into politics in my mid-20s. I wasn't one of those folks who was a legacy kid or realized when I was 18, 19 years old I was going to go into politics. So I talk a lot about that, and in the book I talk about different types of candidates that I've worked for, and there have been flawed candidates that I've worked for. And what I mean by that is if they're not the person that you thought that they were, if they have a flaw that took down their campaign, and that's a serious thing that if you work on a candidate you have to deal with. And I pose that question in the book. Well, what would you do if your candidate, you found out that there was something severely flawed about this candidate? How does that affect you? Because you still have to think about yourself. You still have to think about how are you going to move your career in a scenario like that. So I talk about that using examples of candidates that I've worked for.
Amazing. We actually have some questions from the audience. 2 questions.
Hi.
Hi.
In the 24-hour news cycle, it's really easy to get desensitized or overwhelmed, and I was wondering if you had any advice for someone who's trying to stay in the know, but also not trying to be flooded with all this information at once.
Yeah. So when we were talking about what I do, to have that balance and with my family, there are times where I'll spend a weekend and not listen to news on purpose, and because I need that break. I need to step away from it, and I will focus all of my energy on my family, on my daughter, and and that works for me. It works tremendously for me. And then you go back and you're like, wow, this just happened in the last 48 hours, and you're trying to catch up, and it feels insane trying to catch up with the madness. But it's you have to walk away from it. You just do, whether it's a vacation, whether it's time with friends for one evening or visiting family. It is really important to walk away because what we're going through right now is not normal. It's too much. It's an overload, and it could depress you. I mean, I know people who I tell them stop watching cable, just stop. And they're not in my business. They're just, everyday people who are frustrated with what's going on, and they're constantly watching. And I say to them, step away, step away from the madness for a little bit, because it's not healthy.
We have one more.
Hi, I was wondering what your favorite quote or passage is from your book.
Oh my gosh. Wow. That's a tough one. Honestly, I talk about, one of the favorite things was something that I just talked about, is who I dedicated the book to. That's really important to me because I think my dedication says a lot about the book. And so that's really it. I go to that a lot because it's a way for me to explain the book in a much more deeper way, right? When I say, this book is dedicated to anybody who's been told no, I hope that my book inspires you and motivates you. And I think that is one of my favorite parts of the book. And it was a very thoughtful, mindful thing that I did, because I could have dedicated to my mom, my daughter, my partner, and I didn't, because I thought the book was bigger than that.
Amazing. Well, Karine, thank you
so
much for chatting with us. And Karine's book is available nationwide at any bookstore today. Congratulations again.
Thank you. Thank you
You're
for having me.
welcome.
Thanks,
You're
everybody.
welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.